back to an episode of the Sema mentorship series with the one and only Matt. If you haven't been following, you're missing out. Check out the links in the description below. But today, this is a very special topic because it's inevitable. First of all, resumes, right? Especially for students and new grads, um, may or may not be required for senior level folks. I'm not sure because I'm not a senior level person, but Matt can tell us more about that. So before we get started, a little bit context. We're going to talk about resume tips, getting hired, some of the resume best practices, and some of the questions that I have received quite a lot um, in the community. We'll be asking Matt today. Matt, would you like to tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself before we move forward?
Sure. And hello, everyone. And so excited to be here. Every conversation with Kunal, I learn something and come out more energized than before. So I am Matt Van Itallie, the founder and CEO of Sema, which is a code quality and mentorship software company, as well as a founding volunteer with the Open Source Welcome Committee to try to bring newcomers in tech into open source, which is a shared passion for me and Kunal. I learned to code as a young man. My parents are coders, but then I went off and worked on the organizational side of technology in governments and businesses before starting SEMA. I have looked at 5,000 resumes, and I have worked with recruiters. I did the math actually before this, who have looked at hundreds of thousands of resumes to filter resumes to me and my team. So spent a lot of time thinking about and reviewing resumes. And one of the things that SEMA is about and that I'm about is helping engineers advance their careers. And so I am so passionate about the power of resumes and experiential interviews to help in that way, because it's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about open source. Students ask a lot of questions related to that. So there's a great initiative, as Matt mentioned, by SEMA that would help you get started with open source. SEMA also has a great Discord channel where you can interact with other folks. But let's let's get started with the agenda that we have over here. So when we talk about resume, we talk about accomplishments, we talk about self-reflection and things like that. Why do we do that? Why is it important?
Sure. So since many of your viewers are at the beginning of their careers, it's really a special moment to think intentionally about the kinds of jobs you want to have and the kind of career you'd like to have. And something I learned a little bit later than I would have liked, though it's never too late, and I'd love to share with your audience is you have a lot of say in the shape of your career. You absolutely need to do the hard work. If you're still in school, get the best possible grades you can. We'll talk about other ways you can help boost your resume. Obviously, open source is a great one. But when you actually start thinking about how to go after jobs and what kinds of career you want, it's actually a lot up to you. And so I always start with reflection and data collection as a way to really to undergird everything you're doing. And so when I say data collection, there's two types that I would highly recommend. One is something, I'm a pretty nerdy guy, so it's a pretty nerdy title, but I just call it a comparative analysis. And the idea of a comparative analysis is every meaningful experience you have, make a list, 2 columns of what you like and what you didn't like about it. And just keep that list going through university, through different projects at work, and build up a set of data, comparative analysis, that you can do a comparative analysis of what the trends are. So for me, some of you know, I was trained as a lawyer. I worked briefly in law-related jobs. And in my comparative analysis, I realized that there were some components about being a lawyer that were not exciting to me and was not the best fit for my personality. By contrast, even in university, I was leading student groups, and I loved the leadership side. I was absolutely, that always came back to me of helping organize a team to do more than the sum of their parts. So for me, my grid had a lot of positives about on the leadership side. As you heard, you can start whenever you want. If you've done any kind of extracurriculars or open source, you can start adding to it, but then certainly each job experience to try to understand. So that's one part, this comparative analysis. The second part, it's definitely not too soon to start, is something called an accomplishment journal or a brag book. And they're similar topics, but the accomplishment journal is a little bit more specific. And that is a moment where you worked on something hard. You learned something. You were very successful. You taught somebody else. You can think of them sort of like vignettes or stories. Those moments, those journal entries, can be helpful for self-reflection, but they're also super helpful for your resume, super helpful for experiential interviews, as we'll talk about in a little. So I hope you'd be willing to take a shot at either building the comparative analysis or the accomplishment journal. We'll follow up with links, free resources to build them if you're interested.
You can check out the links in the description below. And I love how, this is the first time I've heard someone put it in this way. Oftentimes when we hear about resumes, it's like resumes is by you for some other people, right? But Matt is saying that, you can also do some self-reflection, and you can also, like the general accomplishments thing we were talking about. Cool. So that's that. And when you talk about in general, when we talk about managing one's career, we talk about uh, you know um, uh, learning from your strengths and your like weaknesses. So you mentioned about what it is, why is it so. Can you share a little bit more about how to go ahead with it? So the accomplishments book and learning from your strengths and weaknesses, the why part of it. Sorry,
Sure.
the how part of it.
The how part of it,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure. So let's focus on the accomplishment journal, as you said. If you have, so the most important thing is to get a structure that is really easy to use on a regular basis. Accomplishment journals can take some mental work to reflect, and so you want to make the structure as simple as possible. By the way, it's a similar analogy for why linting is really important. You take out the stuff that doesn't require thinking. Have a machine do the check for style, etc. So you can do the hard work of coding. It's actually the same thing for journal entries. The hard part is you getting your ideas on paper. Don't have to spend time rebuilding the structure every time. An accomplishment journal should have two big parts. One part is a list of kudos or compliments. So literally, unless you're like Kunal, who literally already has like 100 million compliments, those of us who aren't as lucky as him, start building the list, and just every source where someone you've worked with, a colleague, a boss, has said something good about you, put it in a doc. Could be a Google Doc, Notion, whatever you use it, so that you can come back to it. You might include some of those as part of a resume or as proof in an interview, but it's a great ego boost when you've had a hard day to just remember all of the times that people complimented you. So one part is just simple. Just save a list of all the compliments anyone's given you. The second part is a series of these journal entries. There are two structures that I have found really successful. One is like a newspaper article. Kunal, I'm very old, but you've seen a newspaper, right? Even if you've not seen it, physical paper. Okay, so people know what a newspaper is. A newspaper story includes what happened, where, who, to what ended as a result, and sometimes the explanation or the why. So answering those kinds of questions really makes it clearer to the audience about really makes it clear to you and to the audience you might use this for what was going on in that moment. I'll give you an example. let's talk about the open source welcome committee that I helped found along with some volunteers from GitHub and EddieHub. Shout out to both amazing organizations. So the what is a website with access to open source projects. The why, I observed that folks didn't know where to get started, and there were so many different places. I thought we needed a clearinghouse to bring people in. The who, some amazing volunteers, GitHub, EddieHub, community volunteers who reached out. What happened? We've had a great response. We have a couple hundred projects across collections and best practices, and we've had great traction in terms of people using it and being appreciative. And what I learned was that there was great hunger for a clearinghouse like this. So you as the writer of a journal entry, you know all of that in your head, but 6 months from now, 12 months from now, you might forget. And so one reason to add that level of detail is so you, as a reader of your own journal, will be able to use it. The second part is that level of detail makes it so much easier for an outsider to understand your accomplishment in that circumstance. So you really want to be specific. Okay, so that was one, the newspaper story. A second method is something I call a logic model. Again, we'll share some links so you can read more about it. It is just a simple methodology that talks about that helps understand how things happen. And so it's very simple. You have resources, you have activities, you have outputs, and you have outcomes. And so resources are stuff at your disposal, time, money, people, whoever is involved. Activities are what you do with those resources. Outputs are, so this is really important. The different outputs and outcomes are similar in that they are the result of applying resources to activities, but outcomes are the most important. And if you're not sure of what's an output or an outcome, write down the full list of everything that happened as a result and pick the things that are most important. The things that are most important are become outcomes, and no more than 5, and usually 2 or 3, and everything else can be an output. But this is such a great way to help put things into your resume because people really care about what the bottom line, like what happened as a result. So let me do a quick explanation. Football team, obviously international football, not American football, given our audience. The resources would be the budget for the team. Budget for the team, a stadium, equipment, etc. Activities would be a certain number of players with a certain number of hours of practice and games and game time. So outputs versus outcomes, and people can debate about this. If you're the team, the outcome is your win-loss record. Maybe it's the number of audience, it's of folks in the stadium or revenue, but it certainly is win-loss. If you're a player and you're building a logic model, certainly you want to talk about your team's record, but your outcomes include amount of playing time, goals, assists, if you're playing defense, your defensive effectiveness. Then there's tons and tons of outputs that matter less. We sold X thousand bottles of soda at the stadium. That is a result of having a team playing, but unless you're trying to talk to a soda company, it doesn't really matter. So you really want to focus the outcomes on this short list. So those are how you do it very tactically. And one of the links that Kunal's going to share, we have Google that we built, free Google Docs that you can just take on and build your own. And also one of our products is a free way to build an accomplishment journal if you're doing it in GitHub.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing, Matt. And we'll leave those links in the description below so you all can check it out. So very interesting, points you mentioned, and it does tie in very well with the next question, which is how do we build a great resume? Because a resume is sort of like a mini version of the things you have done. That's at least how I look at it. So before we get into like the structure part, or let's start with the structure part. Like, how should a resume be structured? What are your some of the best practices you like to follow? And um, would you recommend a one-page resume or more than that?
Sure. So, how long should your resume be? I learned long ago, and it seems to work pretty well, 1 page for every 10 years of work experience. You may think, so almost everyone listening to this, that means 1 page. You may think you've had a extremely unique set of experiences, and therefore um, you need more space to do it. I will tell you, please don't. Please don't, for your sake and for the very busy recruiters who are looking at your resumes. They want to make it. This is the thing. Unlike perhaps a portfolio of your work, where you want to just express yourself as you see who you are. In a resume, you're having a conversation with someone who you don't know yet, and you want to make it understandable to them. And to be understandable to them, you're going to follow as many of their rules as possible, preferably all of those rules, because it makes it a lot easier for them to see the version of you that you want to present. So absolutely, I don't care how much work experience if you've had. If you've not worked for more than 10, if you've worked for fewer than 10 years, only 1 page. Quick side note about my favorite resume ever. Tony Ive, who was the designer of either the iPod or the iPhone, his resume says, "Sir, you got knighted. Tony Ive designed the iPod or iPhone." That's it. So you don't actually need a lot of quantity to prove your quality. You just need the right set of stories. So that's how long should it be. Then let's get to structure before, as Kunal said, getting back to content. I really strongly, passionately believe in a very boring structure. No color, a small number of different sizes of fonts, no graphical additions, not even no lines. It's really just focusing the reader. The more boring the structure is, the more your content will shine, as opposed to them getting distracted. You got to be super anal about the formatting. And actually, when I have built my resume, I actually have a checklist, or have built a checklist of like 20 different things that I check each one every single time before I publish. Are all the dates right aligned? Did I abbreviate dates in some places and not in others? Do I use months in some areas and seasons in others? By the way, seasons I recommend. You don't need to be fully specific, or years even. You don't need to say the exact month. And make sure every time you're following that checklist, are there periods at the end of your bullet points? If yes, fine. If not, fine. Either one is fine, but it must be extremely consistent. Again, this just removes any distraction. Removes any distraction for the audience. Next is, and I think actually this is the last part of structure before we get to content. Next is manage the font size and the borders, tops and sides, to make the page feel as full as possible while still leaving, I'd call, room to breathe. So never less than half-inch margins, and never less than half-inch margins. For folks who are early in their career and may not have a ton of experiences, perfectly fine to have 1-inch margins. And if you don't, what you want to try to do is work with the margins, although never more than 1 inch, never more than 1 inch, and never less than half an inch. And then play with font sizes so that the page feels 80 to 95% full. And you can play with the font sizes in almost any amount of set of experiences to get to that size. So that's structure, and we'll get to content. But pause, Kunal, see if you had any questions or clarification.
No, I agree, and my resume followed the same sort of like standards that you mentioned. I like to keep it clean, and for some reason, people add their photos in their resume, which I don't understand. Like, you don't have to do that, and keep it professional. But we'll talk more about content later. There are a few questions before I forget. You can answer quickly about your thoughts. Um, so the one question I have is about content. I'll ask later, but what do you think about tailoring your resumes towards specific jobs, like one person having multiple resumes?
Sure. Um, I'm going to answer it, but I realized one more very important rule. Many people have a goals or summary section at the top. Do not include that. No one ever reads it. It's not. It's not particularly credible because whatever. I want to be a circus clown. Well, sure. I don't know, but like, let's actually talk about if you have the experience to be a circus clown. I would be bad at it, by the way. I don't have the athletic or coordination abilities, so never have that section. Um, in terms of more than one resume, I actually think it's okay. Um, my If you're a junior, if you're entering the job market, though, you're likely not going to have that many experiences that it would make a lot of sense for it to be different. And so, if you're really, let's say fewer than 3 years of experience, I just don't think it's going to be different enough to make a difference. And so, one is fine. If you're three or more and you're going after really different jobs, 3 or more years of experience, and you're going after really different jobs, I think a second resume, two resumes would be okay. It's definitely more work, and I would much rather you have one awesome resume than two poorly edited ones. So before you say you're going to go off and do more than one, you have to be ready to commit the time to making both of them great. And so that's another reason not to do it if you are, especially on the earlier side of tenure.
Amazing. And speaking of content, um, the question I get quite a lot of times is, Kunal, you saying build your resume or whatever, but we don't have shit to put in it.
Hmm?
We have not done anything, right?
Hmm?
uh, what do I do? Like, it's pretty blank. So regarding content, um, what are your thoughts about, let's divide it into three categories.
Hmm?
People who have just started, students, these are mainly the students, second
Hmm?
year, sophomore sports, um, don't have anything. But to them, I answer like, take part in hackathons, join student communities, or open source or whatever. It can. That's what I did. So that's fine. So people who are just started out, students, um, people who are looking for like new grad roles, sort of like
Hmm?
that, like just graduated 1 2 years of experience, and then senior folks.
Sure. So anything you do for at least 50 hours, 50, and maybe even 25 hours, maybe, can be a sufficient story for you to add to your resume. So we're doing, the first category first. So Kunal is exactly right. Let me say, and I've said this before with you, and I'll say it
Um,
again: grades are most important. Um, uh, the reviewer, because it's so clear how well you are doing relative to your classmates, um, do whatever it takes ethically and appropriately. I mean, work hard to get the best possible grades you can, because that answers questions on behalf of interviewers in a clear way. After that, then start working on additional experiences. Um, it is certainly possible. I'm trying to use words carefully. I suspect that you could do at least 4 50-hour projects a year. A hackathon you take really seriously, contributing to an open source project, which of course Kunal and I are passionate about. Maybe you get a formal internship, but with open source it doesn't really matter. Maybe you're a teaching assistant, etc. So it's not about the quantity of them. And if you do 4 a year that are credible and you do a good job, um, then you could graduate with 12 if you're starting in your sophomore year, and 12 is even too many. Um, you have to do a good job and you have to take them seriously. Recruiters and potential employers can see right through you just signing up for a bunch of them, just like maintainers can see right through you just clicking approve, 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 right? They have to be about quality and substance. Extracurriculars, helping out with professors, any of those, open source, any of those are ways to add. That's in school. Early after you have a job, and actually I should say the reason we started with accomplishment journals is you should be keeping track of each of these things, what with the logic model or with the newspaper story, what did you do, what happened, etc. Saving those as you go will make it so much easier for you to write your resume, to be ready for an interview about them, to fight imposter syndrome, which we all face at different points in our lives, and just as an ego boost in difficult times. So the accomplishment journal, I know I'm giving more homework, but doing this is not only better for the resume, but it's also way better for the interviews down the road. So keeping accomplishment journals about all these things, super important. So early tenure folks, as many high quality extracurricular experiences as you can, as long as they're high quality and you're keeping up your grades. Early tenure, the story of an accomplishment journal is different assignments at work. And again, they're likely at least 50 hours, sometimes 250 hours, but certainly every 3 months, you should be able to say you have done at least one different thing at work that lends itself to an anecdote in your resume. It might even be 2 things each month, each quarter, which means by the end of the year, you'll have 8. Write as many journal articles as you entries as you can, so you have a bunch to pick from, because you want to have a lot of raw material to pick the best stories. But a story at work could be building a feature, learning how to code review, learning a new language or framework better than you did before. Discrete moments. Then third, more senior, working for 8 to 10 years makes it a lot easier to build your resume than working for one page, because you have so much raw material, than you're starting out. But it's actually the same approach. Try to do an accomplishment journal, if not every week. Some people do certainly every month. So you have so many different stories to tell, and then you just get the privilege of picking better and better stories, so that your resume is just about really powerful moments. Doesn't mean just success, by the way, just powerful to the audience.
Thanks for sharing, Matt. And just one question I have for you is you mentioned about, we're talking about content and talk about all these accomplishments and keeping track, basically. So do you recommend keeping an up-to-date resume at all times? Because to be quite frank, I don't have a resume right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't, actually. I do recommend an hour a week reflecting, for personal growth, for personal planning. If you can't do an hour, can you do an hour every other week to write journal entries? The hard thing is not writing. The hard thing is remembering. Remembering is a lot harder. And so if you just keep them going, just keep these going, then you can, the anecdotes, the journal entries, then you'll have it ready to go for when you need it. Now, that said, that's generic advice. Specific advice, it actually takes work, practice to build a resume. So if you're a sophomore, I'd say it's more important for you to sign up for open source projects and do them than to work on your resume, because you don't have that much to say. If you're a junior or later, you actually need to start practicing building a good resume. So I would build it, have it ready, go to the career office if there is one available, and have them take a look at it. But then you don't need to have it ready. If you don't need to keep it up to date, as long as you are building the raw material, the accomplishment journal, on a regular basis.
Yeah, agree. No, I just wanted to ask that because I don't have a resume right now. Like when I got a job, I just why would I need a resume now? I'm not planning to like shift. So
Yeah. I
uh,
mean, your
yeah.
audience. So Kunal is an incredible human being, but what comes with incredible is he is exceptional. The degree to which he has um, built a reputation and a brand is
Hmm.
extremely rare and extremely impressive. To your audience, to everyone listening, I say don't plan on that. If it turns out you're that special, great, but you
Hmm.
actually will need a resume
Yeah.
to build your experiences. So be impressed. Be use Kunal as a shining star, but plan conservatively. Plan you will need a resume to look for
Hmm.
things,
Yeah.
and so try it once. But no, you don't need to keep it up to date every month, something like that.
Yeah. Could not agree more. Definitely. Do as I say, not as I do. Is is what the point here. Um, just one more thing. This is something like I followed quite extensively when I was making my resume. Is using as many opportunities as you can to add metrics, numbers,
Oh,
stats.
exactly. That's right.
Hmm.
Um, your document should have as many numbers as possible. And so, one of the review checks. Thank you for reminding me. One of the review checks should be how many anecdotes have numbers involved. The best kind of numbers are comparative. Um, the simplest example is I was first. This is not true. I was first in my class in the computer science major among 100 students. I was number one. And this computer science program is at a university that is number two in my country as measured by X. You don't even need to say who it's measured by as long as it's credible. That's not only a number, it's a comparative number. So the reader who doesn't need to know much, doesn't need to know anything as long as you're telling the truth. And of course, better to have a less stellar resume than to not tell the truth. So over time, you'll just get better and better. Never, ever, 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 ever misrepresent. That is numbers and comparative numbers, so they can see. Um, Other numbers could be, um, let's do another one. Contributed 50, volunteered for over 50 hours with Becca Lira. Shout out an amazing open source project. Naomi is amazing. During that time, and maybe the next line would be contributed approximately 100, answered approximately 100 questions for the audience, for the community. Doesn't have to be exact, but you should be close. Created 75 pull requests, reviewed 50 pull requests. So that gives an idea of the quantity. And then Becca Lira maintainer, uh, let's say, asked me to become a maintainer myself. And so in the tech world, like that would be a very impressive set of experiences for someone in college, in university, or starting out. And remember that kudos of give me that kudos list. Asking you to be a maintainer is definitely a kudos, and you should keep track of it. And think of that story. Okay, this person did some work. Feels like about a lot of work, and as a result, the external validation was someone else saying to become a maintainer. Right? It's a huge sign of success in this community. So all to say, read through it. If there are not numbers, think about ways of adding them. And I'm a broken record on this. But if you keep an accomplishment journal that includes quantitative data, man, that is much easier to read and add to your resume 6 months later than to try to remember. Well, just how much did I do?
Could not agree more. So I mean, in the end, just make it simple, um, easy to understand. If you're applying to big tech companies, they look at your resume. I don't know, 7 seconds. That's the sort of like the saying out there. I'm not sure how true that is, but yeah. So yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing, Matt, and hopefully that was helpful to a lot of folks. All the links and resources that Matt mentioned you can find in the description below. And always a pleasure, Matt, and we'll see you in the next one.
Amazing. Kunal, thank you so much, and good luck, everyone. I'm really